Good afternoon and welcome to Odysseysware's webinar, How to Prepare for the New ESSA Evidence of Effectiveness Requirements. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Tyler Wood from the Odysseyware marketing team and your webinar host for the day. Presenting today is Steve Raleigh, CEO of Acumen Partners. Steve has been working with policymakers for many years and involved with ESSA since its inception. With more than 20 years of experience in business management, Steve has had an illustrious career in business and in education. Prior to Acumen Partners, Steve engaged in principal leadership positions in leading organizations including Pearson, McGraw-Hill, Master Teacher, HMH, and Ed Lights. We're excited to have Steve present for us today. But before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. Attendees will be on mute, but feel free to submit questions through the presentation using our chat feature. I will review and organize the questions at the end of our session. So now I'd like to turn it over to Steve to kick off our webinar.
Thank you, Tyler. I'm happy to be speaking with everyone today. This topic of evidence of effectiveness is one that I know all of you have heard about. It's coming to a peak now. And we'll learn the reasons why this issue of evidence is starting to become a peak that's hit every educator in every district across the country, and why that timing happens to be now. But I want to start off our conversation today really understanding this concept of evidence and why this has become a problem now. Remember, the new federal education law, ESSA, the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary School Act, was passed at the end of 2015. And there was some focus, a lot of focus, on the fact that the United States was slipping in its world standing in terms of academic performance. We had continued to grow, as the Pew Institute points out here on the image on the left, that the United States is among the highest per capita spenders on student education. And we are far below our peers at that spending level when it comes to our actual performance. This is an issue that many of the people who are forming the laws and drawing the budgets from the federal perspective focused on heavily in their debate, that if there is continued investment in education, there had to be improvement in world standing. And they settled on evidence-based instruction or evidence-based practices to be the solution behind the investment. Their goal in doing so was that it would push or force educators to think carefully about what they're working on with students, how they're addressing student needs, whether they're unique needs or group needs, subgroup needs, and then use evidence-based to look at their previous practices, their previous efforts and outcomes, draw a baseline, and then begin adopting practices that would improve against their previous performance, and do that in an organized way. So when we talk about an evidence-based model, the way an evidence-based model works is that there's actually multiple small investments that are made at the same time, and they look at, and as somebody, an administrator, looks at all of these concurrently, saying which of these is going to start. So if we were doing this in a school, we might take a look at 3 kindergarten classrooms, similar student bodies, and we might change 1 or 2 things that we thought would be effective. Classroom A would receive a new set of primers. Classroom B, a new reading technology, and Classroom C would have more unstructured time for time outside. And we would want to be following the evidence. What is it that we want to see out of these students, and which of these classrooms do we see the most of this? So if we're looking for student engagement as one of our goals, as demonstrated by willingness to finish a written activity, and we've got a few other goals that we've set around that student's performance, then we run those programs for, in this case, a year, and then we measure the outcome. And in this case, we're looking at year 0. That's our first time we've gathered our data. That's our baseline. At that point, when we're starting, it looks like our 3 classrooms are performing about equal. We've introduced an element into each classroom that's unique. We're comparing them now, and we look at this and say classroom A with the new primer did not grow as much as classroom B and classroom C did. So they would look at that and say, you know, there's really not much evidence that the primer worked. Somehow this technology or this unstructured time was the one that gave us better outcomes. Then in planning for our investment and which plans and goals to pursue for year one, the money that would have gone for classroom A and to continue to purchase primers is now reinvested in an area that we had a better outcome. This is a very simplistic example, but yet it's true to the form that has been set up and established by the Every Student Succeeds Act. The idea being that those things that get the results we're hoping for, the outcomes that we need, those tools that are the most successful, or approaches or collections of tools, whether it be teacher training in conjunction with a program like Odysseyware, whatever the combination is that we're experimenting with and that we're collecting evidence on, if they do not achieve the target result, then we don't reinvest. If they do achieve, then we reinvest there. If we have a year where nothing seems to have achieved, we have to explain it and then decide where, if we qualify for further investment, where do we put our eggs? So we'll need to cut something out in order to reinvest in something better. So the concept of evidence-based is we drive future investment. And in this place we're talking about education, our classroom, what's happening with the students. In other industries, it's pharmaceuticals, what medicines get developed, what training techniques are used for doctors, what robotics elements are forwarded for the further investment. This concept is used widely and achieves great success. And researchers and investors look for evidence-based programs to place their money. What Congress has essentially done to educators across the country is said, we don't know how to help you achieve better students or stronger school performance, but we do know that this process has worked in many other industries, and they've written it into the law. And what they're saying is that the previous methodology that established the first elements of rigor in federal funding, that was with No Child Left Behind, and that indicated that any program which we were spending federal money required a research or scientifically based foundation, that wasn't enough. That's how Congress viewed it, that the efforts under No Child Left Behind did not generate the results that they were looking for. Research alone, that this program was founded or grounded in a scientific approach, was not enough. What they require now is that we have actual evidence of the product performing in the learning environment with these students. And they have separated the evidence into 4 different categories. So tier 4, which is the lowest barrier or hurdle that a school needs to cross in order to begin spending their federal funds, you simply have to demonstrate a rationale. It's essentially equivalent to the old research or scientifically based model. We need to demonstrate a rationale that this program should succeed. It's based on our best knowledge and our best skills at this time. And then on the year that we're launching or moving this product forward, we must be collecting evidence that this program is working or failing, so that we know how to invest our money the next year. So during that first year of implementation, or first period of implementation, we are pursuing one of 2 or possibly 3 evidentiary models. Promising evidence is something like a correlative study, where we're taking data points that may have historic value, and we're trying to tease out a correlative relationship. We may not be able to show a causal relationship, but we can show that time on task with this set of online tools demonstrates better performance on standardized tests. So we have time on task with a positive correlation to standardized test performance. can't really show, because we didn't control for it in an experiment, we can't really show that the time on task with this digital tool actually created or contributed to the higher standard test scores, but we think there's a relationship there. There is some, we just don't know what exactly the mechanism is. Better is more of a scientific study. So if we get away from a correlative study and we bump it up a notch in quality, we might go with something that's a quasi-experimental, not a true controlled study, but approaching it, much more rigorous. A lot more effort goes into it, and yet the data is far more substantial in being able to show a causal relationship. So if we've got something that's a tier 2 study, that's moderate evidence. It's not flawless, but it is stronger at showing a causal relationship. If you've got strong tier 2 data that says using these online instructional tools has increased performance on standardized tests, and we can say it has increased and we've used a larger sample, that's strong evidence. That warrants a much larger investment the following year in the use of that tool. And tier 1, the highest level of evidence, this is true experimental, well-controlled evidence. It's hard to do in an educational setting. We don't get to choose a lot of the characteristics that our students come with, but it's not impossible depending on how you choose your plan. We'll talk about that in just a moment. The goal by the federal government was to give a lot of latitude to the states in the distribution of the federal money, provided that the states held the schools responsible to an evidence-based model for their implementation. So this year, 2017-2018, has been the baseline year. The data that you collect from this year's students, and you establish your baseline towards the ESSA goals, and every state has them. This year, we start measuring against. This is year 0. Important thing to note here is what we've talked about thus far is that all of the federal funds are being funneled through the accountabilities of Title I, and Title I is requiring evidence of effectiveness to demonstrate further investment. In the writing of the state accountability plans, so the plans each state put together and sent to the federal government, all 51 states, that's the 50 states plus the District of Columbia, submitted plans that essentially removed the word research out and submitted evidence-based evidence of effectiveness. There were some states that still included the words research, yet context on most of those, it was tied heavily with the word rigorous research. But it is clear that there is an intention on the part of states to incorporate somehow this concept of evidence. So I want some group participation at this point. It's already hard enough as educators to collect, submit reports, get the data together for the different reporting options that we're required to do as educators. We've got our local area reports that need to be completed and our accountabilities there. We have our state accountabilities and requirements there, and we have our federal accountabilities and requirements there. That's a lot of reporting, that's a lot of data. With Congress requiring higher standards of evidence, they have opened a floodgate, permitting other legislatures to hold out for better performance before they pay. What is the likelihood that participants here on this call, what is the likelihood that states, that you will see states in the next legislative sessions begin to put similar requirements on funds being released for education? So let's use our chat board for a second and give everybody a chance to submit or answer put their thoughts in. What is the likelihood that states will adopt similar evidence requirements for state funding? Okay, and another, yeah, good point, Karen. We have evidence. Actually, we're in the middle of a large study and most states have begun connecting rigorous evidence similar to the model that we just showed you to their state funds as well, effective the next fiscal year. What would the effect be? You know, what does that mean for local school education agencies? Does that mean that the time on task for a teacher is now going to be more occupied with record keeping than it is in teaching? Does it mean that there's got to be a better way for teachers to focus on teaching than just capturing data? Does it mean that schools are going to have to give a lot more thought into where they put their focus and the tools they use in their implementations to ensure that metadata has been collected for them to make wise and informed decisions? You know, and I think there's another question here that we have to ask, and that is this focus on evidence a good thing or a bad thing? In other industries, the focus on evidence has been criticized because it does lower creativity. On the other hand, it generates positive results and is said to spark innovation. So there's an open debate on whether reducing creativity and sparking innovation are not just one way of saying the same thing, and there's some technical differences that they look to help distinguish that. And I think that's a discussion or a debate worth having in education. Sparring and helping our children become more creative is important, and innovation is important. And evidence is tied to those elements. So we'll put that there and move to this next slide here. The path that we've been given as educators to establish evidence, it's not a requirement that we use this exact model. However, this is the model that is exemplified in ESSA, is that there is a needs analysis done at the local level. And that can be defined as the individual school, or it can be defined as the district that is involved. But there's a needs analysis done, and that includes the resources that we have available to us to work with at the local level. What instructional and support personnel do we have? How much PD do we have for these individuals? What products and services are we currently investing in? What technology and tools will be necessary for us to be able to assemble and deliver the instructional needs of our students in order to move the bar forward? What environmental factors are injuring or hurting or adding to or benefiting our students? Is new lighting helpful? Is it detracting? Is the students' flooring an issue that is important, or is it something that doesn't affect us? And operational logistics, etc. So what they're wanting us to do at this point, they are wanting us as educators to select evidence-based approaches. So think about that step 4. Which things are scientifically proven? What approaches do we have where there's strong evidence, or at least strong research behind this approach? If what we've done in the past hasn't moved the needle, then they want us to look and say, well, what has moved the needle for groups who are similar to us? What has another school done? And look for their degree of evidence. And it might just be that very anecdotal, we have similar students, it really worked for us, and then you know this is something that you can pilot. If it has more rigorous evidence, a tier 3 or a tier 1 evidence or tier 2 evidence, then it's something that you can invest in more heavily and with more confidence up front that it will meet your required needs. Once you've selected the resources and their implementation that are utilized in the best way you can based on the evidence, you plan your implementation. Now we know what resources we're working with. How are we going to utilize those in a way to generate the results that we need to achieve our goals? Then you implement that plan, and then you examine and reflect. This is not anecdotal examination and reflection. So what this examine and reflect means, gather the data. Look at the statistical growth on these measures. Identify the issues. Where did we succeed? Where did we not succeed? What was the causal relationship? What's the correlative relationship? And once we know those things, Now we can innovate. Once we understand these are the relationships we see, it's not the happiness of the students or the happiness of the teacher, it's actually time on task and X that really got the result here. So how do we get more of this into our school day to see if more of that will give us greater results? That's the examination and reflection step that they're asking for at this particular point. When we look at evidence-based approach in practice in schools, it looks like this. This year, 2017, 2018, all of the states around the country have submitted their federal accountability plan. Most of those have been approved. Some are still awaiting approval. The state education agencies have actively established their state goals and have communicated those down, or in most cases have communicated those down to the local education agencies. The districts have communicated the goals that are relevant to the individual schools that are involved, and everybody should be in the process now of setting up their individualized goals for their school or their classroom or their district in order to end year 0, 2017, 2018, and at the end of June, take a line, take a data line. Here's where we are against all of the goals that we have set up to be measured on and where we're going to require evidence next year. This has been a huge learning curve all across the country. And it's not, I don't want to imply that anybody has this fully understood or fully enacted. It's not something that I think schools were ready to work forward with, and it's been done with great challenges at the federal level. Nevertheless, this is the timeline that's been prescribed, and it is the timeline that's rolling out. So as we walk into next year, the data that we've gathered this year around our goals is our baseline. Next year, whatever the plan is that we have in place, wherever we decided to commit our resources, that's where the measurement begins. And when we get to the end of the 2018-2019 school year, that marks the end of the first evidence cycle for your schools. So when we get to the end of June in 2019, we'll go back and reflect on the goals that we set. How did we benchmark against our baseline? Did we make progress? Are we better? Are we stronger? What is it that we did? How is that relationship refined? And we have to go back and look at our investments, determine what was it that was an inadequate investment, and send that money to programs that actually worked better. So we have to revitalize our schools. And that means at the end of next year, 2019, this upcoming school year, schools will have to say these programs have not been as successful as those programs, and make the difficult decision, because some of these have been around for a long time, and they're elements that are, you know, part of the core and culture of our schools. But if they're not generating the results and the money's not being well used, they'll need to be shifting towards those goals and practices that led to better results. And then we set the benchmark and we move into the 2019-2020 school year. That's school year 2 for evidence. By the time we finished school year 2, most of the goals that you have set, the programs and initiatives that you have, evidence will be coming pretty clear which ones are truly causally related to student growth and gains. And you'll be able to see those that are less related or anecdotally related, and make better decisions. And the same type of refinement or optimization takes place at the end of year 2. And then the final year of an enhanced base. This is a program that's designed over the period of 3 years to optimize a school, to make sure that the school is operating and funding and investing in and receiving the best possible outcomes that it can within a 3-year period of time. So that's kind of the outside window. On the timelines that are set up in ESSA. It doesn't mean that a school has to wait a year for each of these cycles. There's nothing in the material that says shorter rotations and more aggressive testing within the school years. So, for example, we might break up year one into two benchmarks, a mid-year benchmark and an end-of-year master benchmark, and try a round of products for the first half and then try a round of products for the second half, or approaches or programs. As long as we've given the program time for results to be evident, we've met the requirements associated with evidence-based. So that time is kind of a fluid element based on your decisions at the local level. So while the message itself in the law, as it's written, constitutes or envisions really a 3-year program, it's based on the old I-3 grant, or the process refined or introduced to the market in the I-3 grant. And this is designed to move schools forward in a significant way in international comparisons within 3 years. That is the goal. So the real question, is how are you going to approach that? What tools are you going to be using to improve your graduation rate, to improve the academic performance of students at each grade level? The law, ESSA, is written around the whole learner. It's written around how do we take students who are coming to us with sometimes significant disadvantages and helping them grow on a social and emotional scale, helping them learn and succeed and enter our schools unprepared, but exit our schools ready for college and careers. And one of the things that has impressed me, I'm not an employee of Odysseyware. We're working together on this project because I'm an advocate of technology in the classroom, working with students in a way that gives them an individualized experience. Odysseyware is a very evidence-friendly partner in the fact that they work on a framework of data. The ability with the product to individualize for the specific user, and that user can be the student or it can be the teacher. Teachers are part of the model here, and be able to address what's going on in the classroom, whether it is from a teacher's perspective or from a student's perspective. Being an IEP, a parent, and working in that area quite a bit, it's important to find a platform or a tool set that allows us to customize not just for the needs of those who might be accelerated or the average diversity within the classroom, but particularly for those that struggle the most with curriculum, and put an engaging way for them to find fulfillment and growth. Reporting is going to be a necessary functionality in all of your data partners, gathering data from your infrastructure is the only way that you're going to be able to do your research and your evaluation and reflection steps in the planning stages. So one of the important steps that has been taken by Odysseyware was the preparation of a resource for you as educators to help wrap your arms around the issues of this move from research under No Child Left Behind to these extensive requirements under evidence. This is an 8-page brochure that details the thought that went in behind the research idea, and then why now this evidence idea. It provides insights for you as educators that you can take and customize to your own environment as you grapple with how do we create evidence that this program or that program works, and which initiatives in your schools will you track. So there's insights on how to begin your pilots or begin your tests on your year one basis for this, and starting off gathering high quality evidence, at the beginning of next year. That also contains a significant number of questions to most commonly asked questions that we've received independently and that Odysseyware has received. And if you'd like a copy of this 8-page brochure, reach out to your Odysseyware education specialist or call their representative at 877-795-8904. And I hope we stayed within the time frame here. This has been an introduction to the concept of evidence and its importance and its impact on every school in the United States today. I know that there were some questions that came up. Tyler, why don't I have you sort through those questions and ask the ones that are most important here?
Sure. The first question was a lot of folks were asking if they can have this presentation, and we will definitely be sending you the video link so you can go through it at your leisure. But some of the questions that came up regarding the evidence were, first one was, how many evidence pilots can a school have running at the same time?
That is a great question. So it's as many as you can support. There are a couple of different ways that schools are choosing to look at this, and I will give you my opinion as to which one is most advantageous. Some schools are running their entire school as one pilot, so they're locking down everything they did last year, we're going to do again, and use it as one big pilot. And it's really easy to get started in doing that, and to start that way. So you call all of your education programming for last year your pilot for this year. The problem with that approach is that when it comes time at the end of this year and you show mixed gains or incomplete growth, there's no way that you can dig back through the data from this year and actually find causal or even correlated relationships. It's very difficult. So the schools that are approaching it the easy way at the beginning of the year are going to have the much more difficult problem at the end of the 2018-2019 school year. The more effective way of doing this is to look at the disciplines or the grade levels at your school, choose a natural way that you are dividing up the school population, if it's by groups or subgroups, or if it's by grade level or by learning discipline, and use your pilots within that structure. So let's say that we're working with K6 English or language arts, and we want to show progress at each level. Certainly we're going to be looking at the state standards, and then we might have one program that's different in half the kids than the other half of the kids. So we have one school that uses product A and one school that uses product B. That's already a pilot set up for you, because there's already a difference there, and that's a natural set of pilots. So rather than reforming anything, we're going to use those. And as a school, you look around and you say, oh, we've got Odysseyware, we've been using that for credit recovery, but why don't we take students who have IEPs or these other subgroups and also use them on the tool, and let's see how that tool compares against similar students who don't have Odysseyware. That would be a competent pilot. Then you can watch that over the period of, like we said, a half a year. If you're seeing and noticing evidentiary gains, we can look at the data. That's a pilot that's small enough that we can see the gains, and we have a large enough control population, students who aren't on the program, that immediately we can see and start to establish evidence that this is growing. So the last way is everything's a pilot. So every classroom, every initiative, every teacher who's been really creative and does it her own way or his own way in the classroom, that's the pilot, and we're going to try and track everything individually. That's a great way to approach things if you have the data power as a school and you're able to control for the variables that I don't think most of us are really able to do. So I think that there's a tendency in some schools to feel like, because we're really good and we've got great teachers and we can individualize because our teachers are so good, that you just can't replicate a teacher. You can't do genetic testing and get in another Mr. Johnson. And so that's not something that you can scale with. So we're not trying to measure your teachers per se with this. We want evidence that the PD you're providing or that the tools you're giving the teachers. We always want to measure the best teachers, but this is looking for how are you investing your money. So I'm really not a fan of the very first model where everything is a pilot, one pilot, nor am I a fan of the last level where every classroom's its own pilot. I would say that you choose a fair number across several verticals or grade levels that you can competently track and show the evidence that's needed. And if in this first year you can only do 3 things, but do them really well, then that sets the established pattern for you. And then you move forward on those results. And then the next year, year 1 or year 2, you open up more pilots. This doesn't all have to be done together. So you might have 3 pilots started this year, which you're expanding, but now you know how to start a pilot. So next year you'll have 7 pilots because now you know how to do it and you've gained the discipline as a school. So I think that's the greatest, has the greatest potential for success, is work with focused pilots, smaller number to start with, and then roll those out and build up experience with new pilots coming each year.
Okay, I have another question, Steve. Someone has asked, I want to know if this is from Title I or Title IV federal grant money.
So the accountabilities that we're talking about here on the federal level are associated with the Title I funds, where the accountabilities are tied. And the Title IV innovation monies, I think that's probably where they're asking their question from. There's a lot of underfunding that's gone on with the program around Title IV, and Title IV is wanting many of the same things, but it is not specifically tied to evidence in the same way that the evidence requirements are associated with Title I. You can read a big gap between those, or you can say in practice they're going to be the same thing, which is my perception, that Title IV has enough leeway around it that the practices established for Title I accountability around evidence will more than suffice for what Title IV is asking for if you're lucky enough to receive a Title IV grant.
Okay,
does that answer the question?
Yeah. There's another question from same person. It says, can you tell me what state, if you know, is doing the innovative assessment pilot program?
I don't have anything final on that right now. I know that that's still being pushed. I don't have anything in my hands that's definitive on the answer, so I can't give an answer to that. But when we find out, we'll be happy to release that information.
Okay, I think we're over time now, so we should probably end it here, but thank you so much. Thank you, Steve, for sharing the details on this important topic, and thanks to the participants for joining us. We understand this may be your only break today, and we truly appreciate you taking the time to spend it with us. Shortly, you'll receive an email follow-up with the recording to ensure you have the details you need on this topic. You can also learn more by reading our blogs. We have several blogs on this topic. Just go under our resource link and you'll see our blog site. You can also visit our webinar page to see our upcoming webinar calendar of events. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.